This Choircast podcast is brought to you by The Subversive Soul. Has anyone ever told you that your soul is essentially whole? How about singular, embodied, and wild? Did they teach you how to live from your soul in a way that rearranges your guts and sets you on a path toward wholeness? That's exactly what this book delivers. The Subversive Soul by Phyllis Mathis is available now on Amazon.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Well, hi, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Bethany, and you are on the podcast called This Is Not Church, which, as a United Methodist pastor and a non-denominational pastor, I love church. I could be at church every day of my life. So, but I'm really glad that you are here and that this is not church, because if it was, then you probably would have left because of all the cursing we do. So welcome to the podcast. I'm here with John. You want to say hi, John?
Hi, John.
Nice. And I am also here with an amazing guest named MaryB Safrit. And she will be sharing a little bit about her life with us today, which I'm so excited about. She lives in New York City. She is a writer, podcaster, and speaker, passionate about helping folks who fall through the cracks of the church to help reclaim their agency, to create found family in their lives. And so she's also your friendly neighborhood bisexual, a recovering people pleaser, which most women are. Oh my gosh. And she is a hospitality nerd, which I can't wait to hear more about that. Her podcast, which is excellent, is called Found Family with MaryB Safrit. And she celebrates the creative ways guests are making community in their actual lives. It's available everywhere that you can get podcasts. So I encourage you to listen to that. And she regularly writes on Substack, marybsafrit.substack.com, and we'll put all those in the show notes as well. She's also on Instagram and Threads and TikTok, all the things. So you should check her out. She has also empowering merch on her website. So just when you get a chance, it is excellent stuff that she has there for us to look through. So we're just so excited that you're here with us today. If you want to say hi, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for reading out all of the things about me that I did send you in advance. I did provide the things, but it's always fun to hear people like read my, all of the things I have going on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of things.
That's a lot of things. It is. And it's all good things. I mean, obviously people are engaging with your stuff. They like the content that you bring and your perspective. And something that we usually ask our guests in the beginning is just for them to share a little bit about who they are, what their faith journey has been like, and what brings them to the current moment.
Yeah. So I grew up in rural North Carolina, on the coast of North Carolina. I technically grew up on a farm outside of a small town on the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. A very beautiful area, but definitely in the Bible Belt. So everything is pretty Southern Baptist coded down there. But my parents go to separate churches. They're married, but they have just always gone to separate churches. So I grew up bouncing between the Episcopal church that my mom went to and the Methodist church, the United Methodist church that my dad was part of. And they were 2 blocks down the street from each other because it's a small town. And that's my main, I guess, context, faith growing up. I also went to Catholic school for elementary and middle school. So there's just this kind of like stew of theology that I was kind of just waiting around in. But I would say I ended up mostly at my mom's church, the Episcopal church, and then got into evangelicalism kind of via this guy who I started dating, high school into college, and in college became a Young Life leader, if you're familiar with Young Life. And did like a international mission trip after college with a kind of charismatic-ish non-denominational organization, and then was part of a non-denominational church that was actually Southern Baptist and pretty culty in grad school, and then moved up here and was part of a PCA church that was like not as culty, but so I didn't like realize it was a pretty high control environment at first. I was like, they're so reasonable. They let women be deaconesses. This is like great. Even though I didn't agree with it, but I ended up leaving that church after 6.5 years of like being really involved in it when I came out as bisexual and affirming. And that was very not kosher with that particular church. So currently I find myself without, I guess, a technical church home for the last couple of years, but I kind of consider my church to be my queer Bible study that I go to most weeks. I actually haven't been in a couple of months because summer is just absolutely nutso. But yeah, that's my current kind of church-ish context. And it's done by an organization up here called Kaleidoscope, which is a queer-run organization so that queer folks can explore faith, explore spirituality, and how, like, kind of in the fullness of who we are as queer people. So there isn't any kind of like restriction on that. It's just really a place for exploration, for community building, and just a very safe, specifically queer space for that. So that's the nutshell of my faith journey. It was very short and abbreviated, high view, high level of my faith journey. But yeah, I feel like you guys probably have follow-up questions that we can dig into about what stuck out to you within that. But that's the high level journey as far as my church experience and how I ended up where I am.
Nice. Yeah. I'm curious how you found Kaleidoscope. How did you discover that community and what was it like getting involved?
Yeah, that was like a friend of a friend situation where I've been podcasting for, 7 years now, something like that. Almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years in September, which is next month. No, that's not true. It's 7 years. It's just 7 years. All right. Time's a bit of a construct. It's very dicey for me at the best of times. But yes, 7 years I've been podcasting, and I was doing like some purity culture, like recovering from purity culture series on my podcast. And I was still cosplaying as a straight person at the time and was like, I want to hear from lots of queer voices, and just happened to get connected to Meg Botts, who's one of the co-founders of Kaleidoscope, through a friend who had done, I don't know if they still do this course, but they had like a cohort called Aspiring Allies. And a friend of mine had done it and was like, oh yeah, and this is Kaleidoscope. And I was like, oh, like tuck that away, because I seem like that would be a good guest. So I got connected because I had Meg on my podcast and was like, did a whole episode about how to be a good ally to the LGBTQ plus community. And then a couple months after that, I ended up coming out to myself. And so it was just kind of cool that, yeah, just kind of kismet, God kind of situation where I'd gotten connected with this person and learned about this community that happened to be in the city where I was located. And it turned out to be a really soft place to land when what was a very tumultuous time as far as coming out and trying to figure out what that meant for me professionally as a Christian writer, and what it meant for me personally as someone who went to a non-affirming church and all of that. I think it gave me a lot of courage to know that there was space. There was a space for me, that it wasn't like I was stepping into nothing, that there was, at least I had that option if it was something that I wanted to get involved in.
Were you still going to the church when you came out?
Yeah.
Or had you already left?
No, I was still going. So I came out in May of, it's only been a couple of years since I came out to myself. And that was after a year of knowing like something, like I'm not straight, but I don't know what's going on with me. I don't know how to put it into words, and I'm kind of scared to look at it and examine it. So when I was like finally ready, that was May of 2 years ago, which would have been 2023, I guess. And my last Sunday at my former church was like a couple months after that. When it just got to the point where I was just having these like visceral emotional reactions to being in that church. Even before I came out to myself, it was kind of this like, I was so frustrated by only hearing from like one perspective up front. And it was like
Right.
dudes, straight married dudes who were just like, and it felt like the same message over and over. And I would hear this passage of scripture be read and like have like vastly different questions and think, gosh, there's so much to explore here. Why are we only talking about this one way of seeing scripture? And just like was getting increasingly frustrated, and the cognitive dissonance, like I couldn't stay. I would have emotional breakdowns after church. And finally, the last Sunday, I didn't really intend for it to be my last Sunday. It was more like my body was like, no, we're not doing this anymore. Because at a certain point, it's like, why am I putting myself through this stress every week or whatever? Like there's something going on here. And I don't know, because I think I was in a little bit of denial. I was maybe a little delusional at first, because it's just such a big transition. I was like, yeah, it'll be fine. I just stay at my church and it'll be totally fine. But yeah, I think like I knew what kind of church it was. I knew that, I was a member. So I'd agreed. One of the things I'd vowed was to submit to the authority of the church, the church governing body and blah, blah, blah. And so that would have meant they would have had every right to discipline me for dating women. And I was like, why would I keep myself in an environment where I would be disciplined for something that I don't think is wrong? And also that I think is holding me back in a lot of ways. Because as a woman, I couldn't be speaking or leading in certain capacities that were in line with my skill set. It was just a mismatch on a lot of levels. And it took me coming out to like really fully see like, oh, this is not a place that was made for me. And I am only going to find a certain amount of belonging here. At least as much belonging as I'm only going to find as much belonging as I'm able to conform to what is expected of me. And I can't keep doing that to myself because I'm a totally different person now. So I left that Sunday, and it was actually a Sunday that I was volunteering at Pride with the same organization, Kaleidoscope. And so I left church and like had an emotional breakdown, and then people pleaser me took over. It was like, I can't flake on my commitment. I have to go. But it ended up being a good thing because it was just like going to Pride for the first time was, I mean, I was so like, I felt so out of place at church. I felt so like different, even though I had the privilege of being a white person in a pretty white space. But just like being unmarried, being queer, being all of this, just feeling so out of place with like the nice straight couples and their kids coming in. And then I went to Pride and I was like, oh, this is like, these are my people. This is like an actually like welcoming community. This is a celebration of all of this part of myself that I really believed for a long time. I was so afraid of it. I was so ashamed of it that like I couldn't even admit that it was a part of me. And here we are celebrating it and connecting over it. And yeah, it couldn't have been a more different environment than the one that I left. So yeah, it ended up being a very beautiful day, very hard day, and continues to be difficult at times. It's only been a couple of years, so it still hits me, the grief work and whatever. But yeah, that's been quite a journey for me.
Well, it seems like, thank you for sharing all of that. That was just so beautiful. Your story is like a slow coming out and being involved in a faith community that I'm sure that you loved a lot of the people there, and then finding yourself growing and expanding outside of it. Like this container is not holding me any longer, and it's going to strangle me if I stay in it because I'm expanding beyond what it can offer me. It's like I don't know. I just see it as like an invitation that you get to have when you get to respect somebody else's journey, that it doesn't always happen overnight, and people can't always leave their spaces immediately. Sometimes it takes a long time to admit to yourself that it's time for me to move on. So I just feel like you have like such a unique opportunity to really like foster that connection for people, for them to see that their journey is their journey, and they can be respected on it too, without like arriving immediately. Because sometimes there's this expectation that, we get frustrated when people don't move as quickly as we want them to. So I bet you are very helpful for that.
Yeah, I hope so. I try to be. I've had it was interesting being kind of my my audience is not large. We are small but mighty. And I love every single one of you who are following me, who are part of my audience, who are part of the community. So I don't say that we're small in in an ungrateful way, but like it's a wee crew that we have going on. But still like having so much change and navigating so much change while also being like a Christian in public ish, like an outward facing Christian who's writing about Christian stuff and all of that. It was an interesting thing to navigate that while also doing a lot of inward facing work about my sexuality. I will say though that the writing I was doing really was a huge catalyst for me to explore, to like be a little braver than maybe I wanted to be. Because I was writing for people who are not married at the time, single people. And when I first started out, for the first maybe 5 years of my career. And like I kept kind of coming up against this question of like, so are you going to talk about sex? Are you going to talk about sexuality? Are you just going to avoid it? And I was like, I feel like I kind of owe it to myself and to my audience to stop avoiding this. But I know that I have to do some inward facing work before I can be more open personally. Like I'll interview other people about their journeys and what they have going on, but like sharing and all of that, I had a lot of work that I had to do before I was able to talk about myself publicly, talk about my sexuality and that journey publicly. Which is also just always a weird thing to do in a Christian context, where like my people were great and lovely and like, but it's just all the random people who will, fortunately I'm small potatoes enough that I really don't get very many trolls. And I have my settings, such that like only people who follow me on Instagram can comment on my stuff. So I just kind of don't have to deal with it. But TikTok is a different world entirely. And so every once in a while, I have a video that, someone will comment a bunch of Bible verses on and be like, one guy was like, I'm not saying this to condemn you. I'm just trying to hold you accountable. And I said, I don't need a stranger on the internet to hold me accountable. Like I don't know you. You don't know me. And so I think that has been a really interesting, especially as a people pleaser, that's been a really interesting path to navigate where people feel very entitled to comment on my sexuality and what it inherently means about my faith according to them. So yeah, it was going through all the change and the shifts and the evolution, and doing so somewhat publicly was a very interesting thing to steward. But I've always chosen to believe the best about my people, my listeners, my readers, my people, and they have consistently proved me right. They're kind of the best.
Yeah, I think we found the same thing, that we have a small community with us that come along with us on our journey, and for the most part, yeah, we get a lot of support. But every once in a while, you get that one troll, that one, and being a people pleaser myself, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That you have to, that they feel the need to do that. And you feel, and at least for me, I'm not going to speak for you, but for me, it's like, okay, what have I done wrong that makes this person want to say these things? And of course, being raised in the church, I start, of course, doubting myself, and it's like, maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I'm the one who's in the wrong. But it's really good to have a community that will like help you along those negative spaces and help you to realize that you are who you're supposed to be, and everything is right. I guess it's not really a question in there; it's just more of a statement. But so in this community, you found family, right?
Yeah, I've got my people. I mean, like my like IRL people, I guess, because there's like this weird thing of I'm friends with people who are part of my audience and all of that kind of stuff. But like as far as my in real life found family, would have really been able to find like a really good crew of people. And it looks very different now that I'm not part of a church, because when you're part of a church, it like concentrates your people, and there's like a container, as you said, Bethany, a container for those relationships. So now it's a little more feels more spread out, more like dispersed. But I do have like some really amazing, beautiful relationships with just the best people. I mean, like with the exception of leaving my church, like my coming out experience it could not have been more beautiful because of the people who I have in my life. And they were just so wonderful and supportive. And I was, professionally, like some of my professional connections as well, I told before I came out publicly. And just, it was so affirming just to like see how people showed up for me, how they like celebrated me and supported me. I don't know, as someone who has not always had the best judgment when it comes to people, that's part of the people pleaser thing, right? Where you maybe let some not so healthy humans into your life and you tolerate a lot of shit sandwiches. You eat a lot of shit sandwiches. That's how my therapist phrases it. But yeah, so it was really affirming and lovely as someone who has not always had the best taste and who has tolerated a lot of not awesome stuff to go through this experience where I got to share this really tender and vulnerable part of myself with people and have them respond with such like grace and delight even. And just like, it was a really beautiful experience. But I'd say most of those were and are people who were not either, they were mostly people who were not part of that church or who had been part of that church and left. I think only one of my close people is still at that church, and he's kind of like, I don't know, does his own thing. But I would say most of the relationships with people at that church are no mas, for better or worse. But the ones that did stick around, I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything. They're kind of the best.
I wanted to go back for a minute about the TikTok thing. I'm on TikTok too, and I have the name pastor before my name. And it is amazing how many people take the authority to speak against that, and they're strangers. And so I'm so grateful that even in your willingness to be public with your journey and to be vulnerable in your journey towards strangers, that you still provide a space of hospitality for yourself and for others that you can find like your own rest and your own healing in. And so all those voices that are out there that come with rejection or come with whatever horrible word that they want to throw at you because, they speak on behalf of the Lord somehow, like you have a place to then land and feel safe. So, and in your bio, you talk about hospitality, you talk about wanting to create those spaces, and you want to create a community for yourself, or you ask people how they create a community for themselves. So I'm curious about how you do that in your actual life. Like, what does hospitality look like? What does community look like? And I know you kind of talked about it for a minute there, but like in those practical ways that can help some of the people that are listening right now to look creatively outside of the church and to find spaces of inclusion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been really fortunate that, I have like a solid group of friends from college, and there's 4 of us, and we've like, they're more like extroverted than I am. So they're the kind of people who are like, we're going to get together, and introvert me, who like wants to stay in my apartment and cozy on my couch, is like, and they're like, we're getting together. And I'm like, yes, you're right. We're going to get together. So I do have like some relationships like that are long-term relationships that I know is not the case for everyone. Yeah, I think as far as like community building, hospitality, I love hosting. And I don't have a very large apartment, but it's large enough that I can have some people over. So like, just for an example, around this time last year, actually, I was feeling like very disconnected, very all over the place. Summer's a really hard time because it's like the anniversary of all of like coming out, leaving my church, all of that stuff. So it just is emotionally turbulent. But I was specifically feeling like very discouraged in my creative work, and my creative journey. And I thought, surely I'm not the only one who feels this way. It can be a very lonely and isolating path, especially because as a writer, so much of the work happens just here in this little noggin with me and my onesie. So I started hosting these little mixers of like, it's like, hey, I know some people, I have a space, I love hosting. And so every other month I'll like just send out the invite and have people over. And, kind of, I love to, one of my hospitality practices is to do the awkward part for people. So if I notice 2 people kind of connecting and talking who didn't know each other previously, I'll kind of nudge them and be like, did you exchange information so you can follow up? Because it's like awkward to be like,
I love
hey,
that.
Can I get your phone? Can I get your phone number? Can I get your Instagram? Whatever. So I try to that's one of my hospitality practices, is to try to do the awkward part for people. Because, I've been awkward my whole life and I just own it. And I'm like, it's uncomfortable for everyone. So why not just jump on in? So that's one way that I don't know. I think it's, I guess to take something more general or applicable for other people from that, it's kind of trusting that if I'm feeling this way, I'm probably not the only one. And is there a creative way? What's the invitation in that feeling and in that need? And how can I instead of turning in on myself with that feeling, kind of sending it outward and letting it do something generative. So that's one example. In the past, had been on a trivia team with some friends, and we would meet every week at this local bar and do trivia. And, between questions, we'd catch up, and during breaks, we'd catch up. And it's just one of those easy-ish rituals of just, we're going to be here every week. And, sometimes people are out of town or whatever, but this is just kind of a standing thing that's in the calendar. And we're going to, do what we can to be there. It kind of fell apart when some different people moved and whatever. But that was one thing. Let me think about other things that I've done. I have people who I during the pandemic, especially, this was when we were all so starved for connection.
Right.
I had a couple of friends that I had kind of a standing walk date with pretty much every week. And there was just the expectation that we were going to go for a walk. So that kind of took out the awkwardness of the initial, like, hey, do you want to get together this week? It was more like, when are we going to get together this week? And every week is not practical for some people, but just, I think it's like kind of amazing how sometimes I feel like I'm being insecure or needy by like wanting to have at least some level of, I don't know, commitment or expectation that like some sort of, I don't know, in the calendar representation of like we are important to each other, where it's not just like this kind of idea or whatever, but like, hey, you're an important person to me and I want to make sure we're like connecting. I want to make sure we're like taking the time to be with one another. And so like, can we set up something regular, whatever it is. I have other friends who are long distance friends and we have like ongoing Voxer conversations where we'll like listen when we can and update each other on our lives. So it doesn't have to look one way for different people. But I've been really pleasantly surprised at the different ways that when I've expressed like a need or a desire in friendship that my people generally like reciprocate it and be more open than I think that they're going to be. Not because of anything they've done, just because of my own insecurities and whatever, and struggles to ask people for things and all of that.
Well, I can relate to that because, I'm an introvert myself. Mm-hmm. So it's hard. I find it hard to find community.
Yeah.
Because I can be socially awkward. I'm the first one to cancel on anything. And so it's encouraging to hear, someone else who is an introvert who has built these communities. What do you think was the toughest like hurdle for you to be able to start building these communities?
I think that for me, in my introversion, tend to overcompensate because I feel like I'm not supposed, like being introverted is a bad thing. And so I've actually had to learn like how to say no and not like overcommit myself, or not like, even if I'm the one initiating, sometimes I initiate when like I do not need to be initiating. I'm like a very high initiative person. And this has been another struggle for me, is like not expecting people to meet me in that like effort of either initiating or whatever it is. Yeah, I think expecting mutuality has been a huge hurdle for me. And that's not specific to introversion, but like I said, I think my struggles are like feeling like I'm being a bad friend because I'm introverted, and not honoring my limits and not honoring my boundaries, which means that I'm going to show up somewhere and be resentful that I'm there and be like grumpy and a stick in the mud. Like I can mask pretty well, but I get to a point where like when I'm done and I just shut down. So for me, it's been like being very brutally honest with myself about like why I'm saying yes to certain things and like what's motivating me. And if it's coming from a people pleasing place, I'm like, MaryB, you're not going to be adding to that space. But if you're just showing up because you feel bad. So I think there's a balance there of knowing that if I want to have community, I have to play the game to a certain extent, right? I have to put myself in a situation where I'm going to meet people, but learning how to do that in a way that doesn't just like totally like drain me. And also I think knowing kind of where to look and not, I don't know, paying more attention to like what are the interactions I have that feel good to me, that feel like they don't make me feel self-conscious or weird or whatever. There's like a genuine connection, and it's genuinely someone who I want to spend more time with, and not forcing it when that isn't there. Because I don't know, I feel bad, or I'm supposed to be friends with that person because they're in my small group or community or whatever it is.
Yeah. So it's like you've been able to recognize your own boundaries and what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and
I'm trying.
Yeah, being okay with saying no, which I feel like is a lifelong experience, like especially as a people pleaser.
Yeah, I know. It's so hard, but like I'm learning to do that, I think.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, I'm like, I don't know. I also have ADHD. And so I forget things like, I don't know, that when I agree to different things on the same day, they actually happen in the same reality, like in the same universe. And I forget things like, okay, yes, I can meet this person at this time and do this thing at this time. I make it sound like I have a very active and robust social calendar, and that is not the case. It's certainly less of the case now than it was when I was part of a church. But like, I just would forget things like, oh no, I need to make sure I have time to eat lunch, because otherwise I'm not going to have food until like 5 p.m. So, there's just like boundaries of all sorts that I either forget about, or just, because time, as I said, is a construct that I don't really grasp super well a lot of the time. There's just all sorts of hurdles that make it challenging, I would say, to honor my own boundaries and to be honest and realistic about those boundaries and those limits.
Yeah, I can relate with that as well. I used to have so many like side projects that because I didn't know how to say no. And part of it was because if I said no, they'd find somebody better. I did a lot of theater. I did a lot of stuff in music. And if I said no to a project, then they'd find someone better than me, and then they would never ask me again.
Yeah.
So it was like this almost a negative reinforcement of why I continued to say yes to so many things, to the point where I got burnt out and then had to say no to a whole bunch of things at once. And then you feel like you have to explain why you're saying no all of a sudden.
That's very relatable. I struggled with that a lot when I was at my previous church, because saying yes to things meant like visibility. It meant that I was like seen and known, which is like a whole thing as a single person, especially a single woman in a complementarian environment, is a whole other hill of beans to deal with. But like being hyper involved ensures that you're known, you're seen. And so like maybe you're kind of part of it. So there was definitely for me a fear of saying no, because like until it got to a point where I was like, I have to say no. I have to just like unabashedly start saying no. Because there was a fear of like, if people weren't seeing me, like I was part of the welcome team, for example. And so like I would literally see people coming into the church, and that was like a point of connection where they could remember that I existed and was part of the church, because it was also a pretty big church. And so like, it was not that uncommon for people to stop coming and just like nobody notice. Like they were like, yeah, I haven't been in months and haven't heard from anyone. Like it seems like nobody's even noticed that I stopped going. So there was definitely like a overperforming to try to like make sure I didn't fall through the cracks in an environment that I would say was actively trying to shove people like me through the cracks, because we didn't fit into, what the community kind of was designed for.
Which is often married couples, straight married couples, and families, especially when you got some kids. It's just like, winner. We need to make sure they stay here. And everybody else is chopped liver.
Yeah. Or like, the workhorses, the mules.
Yeah, you're utilitarian.
Get things going because we have so much more time in our schedules because we don't have a spouse or kids and all of that stuff.
When you were sharing your story about how you have created more boundaries for yourself and the things that you've recognized in yourself with being an introvert, it just reminded me of this time when I was already married and I was helping volunteer at a youth group. And I was watching all these youth kids at this youth group. And there were the popular ones over there. And over there were the people that just were kind of more nerdy. I mean, we were so tribal, even in high school, especially in high school. And there were like the kind of the people that were by themselves and alone. And I just felt like I had this epiphany or vision. I don't even know what it was. But in that moment, I recognized that every single person in that room was probably just as insecure as I was and just as afraid of being seen as I was, even though I was older than them and, you know, in a different space altogether, like seemingly having my life together in some ways. I was just as insecure and everybody else was just as insecure as me. And in that moment, I realized that so much of the way that I show up is a choice that I have to practice to take on. So it's like I have to, it doesn't come naturally. It doesn't, but eventually it will if I practice it enough. And seeing every person around me as like people that are worthy to belong and to be included and to be seen, because I felt like I was not seen or included, I think is almost like a superpower. And I know that we don't go through crappy things because God wants to like, you know, because God's sadistic in some way or something. But really, I think that some of those things that we go through and the personalities that we have actually creates better experiences of empathy towards others. And when we go through the hardship and we experience being left out or unseen, it, at least for me, it causes me to like see people even greater. And I can see that in you. Like that just flows through you. Everything that you've said today is just like this sense of how do I help others belong and be seen? And even in your podcast, like you are somebody who helps the people on the other side feel welcomed and included. Actually, I was curious, how did you get into podcasting?
So yeah, it's, how did I get into podcasting? That's a great question.
It was so long ago.
I was like, hold on, let me go back in the tomes
There's
of
been
my
a pandemic.
Yeah. So it was like 2018, I guess. And I moved to New York in 2016, November of 2016, to initially pursue a singing career. And that did not happen. I was like, basically graduated from grad school and did not like singing anymore. But it took me a little while to realize that and come to terms with it. So I was up here, I was, doing some auditions. I was working in a restaurant and the auditions weren't really going anywhere. And, I was also processing just a lot of, I was 26 at the time. So like quarter life crisis in full swing, moved to a giant city from a literal farm in the South. And yeah, just had all of it was hugely seismic for me. I was surrounded by people who were very different from me, who might not even speak the same language as me, as I'm walking down the street here in New York. And also like was no longer in an environment where a lot of my like the assumptions that I had about like, most people are Christians and go to church on Sunday. Like that's just how it is in the South. I was like, I can no longer assume any of that. And so it was really an opportunity to re-examine, what do I believe? What am I doing here? What are any of us doing here? And to kind of process that, I started writing essays, I guess, kind of like little mini essays about, I don't know, concepts like death and sin and music and just whatever, just trying to put words to what I think and what I believe, and, got enough words down that I was like, well, this singing thing isn't working out. Maybe I could write a book, but I don't know how to. I could definitely write a book. I just don't know how to get it out there. And I learned that in order to get a nonfiction book published, you need to have a platform and a niche and a specific thing you talk about and like all of this stuff. So I started a blog, but I decided that I wanted to like mostly talk about being single in a culture obsessed with marriage, because I noticed that there was a big hole in the market, and a lot of the stuff that was there was either about like how to get content, aka please stop bitching to us about your problems. Or
Exactly.
about how to get unsingle as quickly as possible. And I was like, I don't think, and also like it was a lot of married people talking about everything, right? So I was like, I think there's something else here that I kind of want to step into. And I felt like a great way to enter into that conversation, or I won't say start that conversation because it was already happening to a certain extent. But a great way to step into that conversation was to talk to actual single people. And so I decided to do that via podcast because, as you know, audio is a very intimate medium. And I felt like one of the goals was to, and it continues to be a goal, is to give people a felt sense of companionship, that the people that they're hearing from, like they're with the listener, like we're kind of in a common struggle and in a common like effort to just like live lives of faith in whatever context we happen to find ourselves. And how do we actually do that when there are these cultural forces telling us, well, because of this thing about you, or you can't really be as good of a Christian as this other person, like it just all of this BS that gets in the way. Like, how do we strip all of that down? And it felt like audio was like a great way to give this sense of, hey, we're all just gonna we're sitting on the floor of my apartment and we're just chatting. Like, let's lower the stakes on all of this stuff we're talking about, and let's just be people together and talk about this stuff that like nobody really has the answers to, but I think we can explore and kind of figure out and together. So that's why I started the podcast. It was kind of a dual endeavor to like spotlight more people who are actually asking the questions that I was asking and all of the stuff I was exploring and trying to pursue. A way to spotlight like, hey, single people, here are actual single people talking about their lives. And it's not a married person telling you how to live their lives when they got married when they were 19 or whatever. Like, these are actual people in the same situation as you. And let's like kind of try to gather some collective wisdom here. So that was like the initial pursuit, but it still led to a lot of conversations about building community and creating belonging. A lot of very common themes with Found Family, which is what we are today. We rebranded about a year and a half ago. I did like a big rebrand. No, 2 years ago? No. Like, this is the time thing. This is the time thing. I'm like, when was that? It was, I don't know. It was a certain time. Yeah. Anyways, it was a certain time that there was a rebrand. I think the podcast rebrand was a little later. So it was like a year and a half ago, we'll say, to Found Family. But it's a lot of like the same kind of heart of like, here are people who like, we go into this context of church, and it's supposed to be this place where like, especially in an evangelical context, it's like your identity in Christ is the most important thing. And that's like what means that you're in, but you get in and you realize, oh, actually, there's all of these other sub-classifications, and like your identity in Christ is not actually the most important thing. It's like how well you can perform this very specific kind of sub-brand of Christianity. And so, like, what do we do with that? How do we find belonging on our own terms? And how do we, like, I, as a survivor of high control religion, I also end up talking to a lot of people who are survivors of high control religion. So we talk a lot about reclaiming our agency, and like reclaiming our agency from these very important spiritual leaders who we thought had all of the answers. And speaking personally, I very much offloaded like the validity of my faith onto what these guys said made my faith valid. And so how do we reclaim that? How do we contextualize our faith and the good news in our actual lives? And how can that like ripple out into our communities and how we even think about what community is outside of this like very narrow and rigid way of thinking about community and family and all of that?
Yeah, I relate to that so much. I mean, as I was leaving the church, I needed something to do almost.
Yeah.
And I found myself writing.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing. I wrote a blog about, and my blog was basically on, if I could ask God questions, what questions would I ask him or them, actually, because one of the first things I did was take away gender from God. And then from that came a podcast. So, I mean, that's how we are here. That's why we are doing what we're doing here. So I can relate again to that journey, looking for, another community when you left one that you thought was the one you needed. And then realize as you leave that community, first of all, you weren't that important to them. And that's the sad part, because as I left that community, how many of my quote unquote friendships went away?
Oh, ghosted. Absolutely ghosted. Yeah.
And I think I remember posting something online once. It's like, I don't know which is worse.
Mm-hmm.
Having someone get in my face and tell me how I'm a horrible heretic, or just flat out ignoring me. And I came to the conclusion that the ignoring was harder and more hurtful, because I would see these people in public and they would turn away and walk away.
Mm.
And again, not a question there, just another, I can relate to what you were going through. I can relate to the whole idea of creating a podcast, creating a community around you.
Yeah.
And,
John, I'm curious, like how many conversations you and Nat had, and like, what was the dreaming up of this podcast like for you?
Well, it was funny how it happened. Is I was writing the blog and I thought the blog would go on forever. Like, I can continue this thing. I mean, there's so many questions to ask God.
Yeah.
I could do this for forever. And then as about a year around it came, I was like, no, I think I'm done. And so I just went to Nat and I was like, hey, I got an idea. And at the same time, I've been listening to podcasts like crazy, trying to find my people, trying to find the people that were talking about God the way I was seeing God, talking about community the way I was seeing community, being someone who was very vocal about being affirming, finding people who were affirming. And I just like, I think we can do this. I think we can create a community that is safe for other people. I don't know if that's something that you resonate with, if that's, a decision you had in your podcast.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. I mean, I thought a lot about when we were a singleness podcast, I was like very adamant. Like, I would get sent pitches. Occasionally I would, people would say, oh, you should have this person on, and they'd be married. And I'm like, nope, I'm sure they have a lot to contribute. I'm sure they are wonderful people, but I am only talking to people who are single on this podcast. And I've expanded that since the rebrand to Found Family. But I would say very much like I still get pitches. Sometimes I get pitches from people who I'm like, do you know, like, God bless them. But I'm like, it's one of the first things in my Instagram bio is that I'm queer. And like, you're pitching me someone who is like, very like traditional evangelical vibes. And so, but anyways, but yeah, I think there's a lot of intentionality around who we're talking to, who I will have on the podcast. And a lot of that is about like the kind of community and general ethos that I want to create. And it's a lot of times it's people who maybe don't have the biggest platforms, people who like are I don't know, maybe they've even been doing what they've been doing for a while and still don't have the biggest platforms. But, you know, I'm always like looking for the voices that I haven't thought to include, and the voices that like have not been given the platform and the stage, who have not been upfront in a lot of church spaces, who have not been recognized for the wisdom and the expertise that they have. So, and yeah, I think for me, it ends up being a lot of queer people, just because that's who I want to hear from, because I think that queer people are asking, but like any marginalized group, I think that's where Jesus is most vibrantly alive and active. And so of course that's who I want to hear from. And that's where the most like the richest lineages of like creative community making happens, because these are communities that have been pushed out of the more traditional systems that we have for community making for generations and generations. So I don't know if I answered your question, but like when I think about the kind of community and the kind of space I want to create, it's very much a space where like that person who, it's a space for that person who has like walked into church and felt like, you know, just felt that feeling of like, I should belong here, but I don't, and I don't really understand, and like taken on that burden for so long that like they think they're the problem and they need to support themselves and they need to change themselves and whatever in order to belong, but are finally maybe at a place where they're realizing, oh, maybe it's not me, maybe I'm in a system that wasn't made for me. And so like, but this is like the system and the worldview and the method that I know for making community. And so what else is out there? And so I definitely want it to be a community that values exploration, that values hearing from people who are very different from them, who see the world very differently from they do, or whose experience. But like, I think at the same time, I try to position the conversations or like ask questions that kind of get down to that kind of common humanity of like that shared humanity of there is that thing in all of us that knows we were made to be with one another in some capacity, even though like people can be the worst. And so, yeah, just like try to create a space where we can have honest conversations about that struggle and all of the joys and the challenges and the absurdity and the frustrating bits of it.
I kept thinking about how like that verse, when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, Christ is there. And I just got this like picture of just some strictly observant traditional Christians that are gathering in the name of Jesus. And they're like, they have Jesus in this box and they're like, look at this. Isn't this beautiful? Compared to people that have had some hard knocks, and queer people in general or marginalized people in general. And they're just like 2 or 3 are gathered. And it's like Christ is just like it's just exuberant, just this joy, because they're coming in already with a sense of curiosity, openness, and wonder. Oftentimes people that aren't queer, and who are raised in the church, especially in the evangelical church, we come in with all the answers. We already know what we're looking for. And when you've been told your whole life that you don't belong, but yet you know inside that you do, then you come in with this sense of wonder already in place. And there's so much more movement that can happen in places like that. So I just really appreciate our conversation today and just the life that you've brought to John and me. And, it's been incredible. I have one last question before we close up. And then John, if you have a question too, that'd be great. My question though is, what is something that you've always wanted to try, but you've been too afraid to do it?
Oh, I don't know. Cause I'm not I don't know, what came to mind immediately was skydiving, but that's a lie. I don't want to try skydiving.
I know, right? Nothing
about me wants to jump out of a plane. I've got enough. I have anxiety. So just sitting there checking emails gives me enough of an adrenaline rush. I'm good. Thank you. Let's see, something that I've been scared to try. Here's what I will say. I think I am someone who likes being in front of people, which is kind of funny for me, for an introvert to say. And I think I have been, it's not that I'm afraid to try it, but it's more I feel a lot of fear and anxiety from being in a complementarian space for so long about pitching myself as a speaker, even though it is something that I do and is something that I like doing. I think that, so it's not that I'm afraid to try it necessarily. It's more that I have still some mental baggage around. So the fear is pitching myself more regularly. And the fear is believing in myself and believing that I have something to contribute to and something to say and expertise to share and whatever. I think that's the fear that I I'm afraid to try, is owning the gifts that I have been given when it comes to being in front of people. That's my answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel that too. There's especially as women, there's this whole that we've been taught that we're supposed to be gentle and quiet, and to put ourselves out there and to say, no, I think I actually have a word that I can bring, and I have a perspective that's important, and to believe in ourselves and advocate for ourselves. It goes against everything that we were modeled and taught as young people. And so I encourage you to step into that. And I think your voice is really needed in places outside of your podcast. So yeah, I hope that for you. Any last thoughts, John?
Oh, I think I keep saying, but I can just relate to what you just said so much. I mean, I was at a candlelight vigil for a friend that we lost just yesterday, and I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something, and the anxiety, the negatives about myself, spoke louder, and I didn't say anything. And they even say, you speak now because you might feel guilty that you didn't. And I didn't. And then I had so many things. I was I could have said this. I could have said that. I could have said this. So I can really relate to that anxiety, that fear, quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, this has been so beautiful. Thank you for spending time with us today. And for everybody who's listening, you can find all the ways that you can connect with MaryB on social media and on her Substack and on her podcast. So you can find that in our show notes. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.